Hi, and welcome back to the Final Solution Part 2. In Part 1, we had started the process of genocide, starting with propaganda, laws eventually passed to make discrimination against the Jews legal, and then you start moving them out, first into ghettos, but as we're going to see next, moving them into concentration camps, and then ultimately moving in that direction of the final solution, where death is the next step. So let's carry on here. So concentration camps. Thousands of Jews were transported to work camps around Poland, Austria, and Germany to work as slave labor for the Nazis. And a lot of these camps were in Poland because that's where a lot of these Jews lived. So the Nazis got very good at moving the Jews into these camps, but they also were very good about putting these camps all over the place to make them more accessible to get Jews there. So they didn't put them all in Germany or all in Austria, say. They built these camps around different countries to ensure that they would be close to where the Jews were living. So railroad boxcars were filled with people with no food or water as transport. Of course, they didn't have bathrooms in them either. Sometimes you could be on these railroad cars for days or even weeks at a time as you were transported to one of these concentration camps. So you can imagine how smelly, how uncomfortable, how difficult that would be without food and water to make that journey, only to end up in a place that, you know, you're either going to work as a slave or you may be killed. So thousands starved, many were worked to death or even killed in these camps. And initially the concentration camps weren't death camps. Jews were killed there. They didn't work. If they misbehaved, sometimes the Nazis killed them out of fun. So there was death at these concentration camps, but they weren't designed to be death camps. They were designed initially to be, you know, places to put the undesirable and certainly use them as slave labor. And when we watch Schindler's List, the camp that we're going to see, the camp that's primarily focused on in the movie, is the Pleszow camp in Poland. And notice how I'm pronouncing that. The W in German gets a V sound, so I say Pleszow. And that's how you'll hear it pronounced in the film. So the Pleszow camp in Poland is the main camp you'll see in the film Schindler's List. So we'll definitely see it when we start our film here very shortly. Now the death camps come next. In 1942, the decision was made. It became policy in Germany that the Jews were supposed to be eliminated, were supposed to be eradicated, and that is the final solution. So once the final solution was decided upon, many camps became extermination camps aimed slowly at killing Jews. The two men that were really behind this are Heinrich Himmler and Adolf Eichmann. They were the chief engineers and overseers of the final solution. And the reason I'm giving you this information is I want you to understand it's not Hitler that's making every one of these decisions. He's got Goebbels in charge of his propaganda. He's got Himmler and Eichmann here. So there's a lot of people that are very anti-Semitic, that are higher ups in the Nazi regime, that are helping make these decisions. So you have to understand that it's just not Hitler. Anti-Semitism is very strong within a lot of people within Hitler's regime, and of course the civilians within the countries in this area. So at first, bodies were buried in shallow graves. This is problematic, and I talked about this in my class. If you don't bury bodies deep enough, you know, you can have arms and legs sticking out of the ground. Once they reach rigor mortis, it can be a very eerie kind of thing, but it's the stench that could be smelled for miles. And you know there's Germans in these towns, or Austrians or Polish that live nearby, that were either ignorant of this or they certainly ignored the atrocity. And the big question a lot of people will wonder, and we'll ponder this question at the end of this unit, is, what about the people who didn't do the killing? What about the people who weren't Jews? I mean, what role did they play in all of this? I mean, they must have known what was going on. And the truth is, some of them did. But the truth is, some of them didn't as well. Knowing that you smell these things, you kind of had to wonder if some bad things were going on under the Nazi regime here. Well, throughout all this, the Nazis forced Jews to transport dead bodies, to exhume bodies, and even kill. You're going to see some of this in Schindler's List. You made the Nazis do, or sorry, you made the Jews do a lot of your work for you. After all, they were cheap labor, and so they're going to do some awful things, and they're going to be treated very, very poorly. Here's just a little background on Heinrich Himmler. He was a member of Hitler's SS and a leading member of the Nazi Party. He was really the overseer of the death camps. So, you know, he was really the one who kind of helped was one of the architects of this. He coordinated the killing of the 6 million Jews, and he committed suicide before he could be questioned. So when this is all said and done, Heinrich Himmler will never face prosecution because he will kill himself. The other man I mentioned was Adolf Eichmann. He was also a member of Hitler's SS, and he was in charge of facilitating and managing the mass deportation of Jews to the extermination camp. So he was in charge of coordinating the trains, getting the trains to put these Jews on, and getting them to where they needed to go. Ultimately, he was caught and executed for crimes against humanity in 1962. Just to give you a little bit of heads up on this, though, he's one of very few who are prosecuted and executed for the Holocaust. Most of the SS officers, most of the Nazis involved did not get prosecuted, did not see any jail time for what they did. And I'll tell you a little bit about that at the end of this unit. Of course, as we mentioned in class, gas chambers became the main mode of death. And this is efficient. You can kill a lot of people in one particular sitting with Zyklon B gas pellets. So thousands could be killed in mere minutes. Like I mentioned, Zyklon B gas pellets were dropped in. The Nazis did experiment with lots of different ways to kill. They wanted to do this as efficiently and cheaply as possible. Bullets cost a lot of money, so ultimately it was gas that was used. And you would build these gas chambers right next to crematoriums, and you would quickly burn the bodies to get rid of them. So bodies were moved to crematoriums where bodies were quickly burned. And this is when the Nazis got really good at this. And I hate saying that. I don't like to say that as a positive. But they were very efficient. They could kill thousands of people a day, burn the bodies, and these crematoriums operated 24/7. Smoke coming out of the chimneys at all time of people's bodies being burnt. It sends a shiver up your spine. It's just so inherently evil. Now, here's what really gets me. When I was researching this a couple of years ago, I heard about Sonder commandos. It was something I'd never heard of before. So oftentimes Sonder commandos were used. They were basically Jews who were forced to put dead Jews into the crematoriums. So we would force these Jews to take the bodies out of the gas chamber after they had died and put them in these crematoriums. And one of the stories that I heard as I was watching one of these documentaries is there was a Sonder commando who's obviously forced to do this. He has no choice. He is taking bodies out of the gas chamber, and he has to take his own father's body out of the gas chamber and put it into the crematorium. And he was a survivor of the Holocaust, so he could tell this story and how he had cleaned up his father's body, and basically kind of how emotionally dead he was at that point because of all the death and horrible things that he had seen. But he definitely remembered very strongly putting his father's body into the crematorium and burning his body. I mean, just an absolute nightmare of a situation for any person to have to go through. Really, really sad story. So here's a picture of the crematorium at Auschwitz. Some of these are still there. You see a little memorial urn has been placed there. Oftentimes they're called ovens. I hate using that word because I use an oven at home, so I like the word crematorium, but a lot of bodies would have been destroyed in these crematoriums. Here's a picture of one of the gas chambers in crematoriums. Gas chamber would be inside of here. You can see the chimney, and you constantly see smoke coming out of there, knowing the ashes are from dead human beings. Now, Auschwitz, we need to talk about Auschwitz. Auschwitz is the worst of the worst death camps. You can see as you entered Auschwitz, say this little phrase, it says Arbeit macht frei. That means work makes you free, or work will make one free. It's kind of there as a little bit of propaganda to make you feel like you're going somewhere safe, but clearly Auschwitz was the least safe place during the Holocaust. Here's some pictures of some of the barracks that are still there today. You can see in the background a lot of them have either been taken down or have fallen apart since the 1940s, but you can obviously tell from this image a lot of people would have been able to be housed here at one time. So let's talk about Auschwitz. Auschwitz was the worst of the death camps, one of the worst places that's ever existed in the history of mankind. It was located in Poland, as I suggested to you earlier. That's where a lot of the Jews were located, was in Poland, so it just made sense to build this death camp there. 1.1 million people were killed at Auschwitz. Of that 1.1 million, 200,000 of them were children. I mean, this was the place where trains would show up, and you would literally get off the train, and you'd be put in one of two lines. One line would be off to the barracks to go, basically be a worker. The other line was basically straight down to the gas chamber. So if you were a child, if you were deemed really not useful, they would kill you within an hour or two of arriving at Auschwitz. And that's just really, really sad. There's nothing you could do. You couldn't run away. You couldn't fight back. I mean, the Nazis had guns. These commandants or leaders of these camps had guns. It was either be shot there or go to the gas chamber. You had no choice. Now, one of the most infamous men at Auschwitz was Joseph Mengele. Joseph Mengele was known as the Angel of Death. He would stand above people and point which line that they needed to go in, but he was more so known for his medical experiments. A lot of what we know about hypothermia today and how what the human body can endure came from the experiments that Joseph Mengele did on Jews. He did experiments on twins to see if he hurt one twin, how the other one would be affected by that. Some really, really awful stuff. So he's often known as the Angel of Death. I have a clip on Joseph Mengele. This won't play. I apologize for that. I wish I could show that to you. I should have taken that slide out, so I apologize. Now, there are a lot of other people that were affected by this story. There was another camp known as Mauthausen in Austria. My grandfather, John Sagan, was there. I'll tell you that story in class. It's a really, really powerful story of survival within one of the concentration camps. But others that were targeted in the final solution were gypsies, as you see here, communists, political prisoners like my grandfather, John Sagan, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, Soviet prisoners of war. Certainly there's a lot of other targets. When we talk about 11 million people killed in the Holocaust, it's not just Jews, because we know 6 million of them were Jews. So in the end, this all proves that the Nazis were very organized, very systematic, and very merciless. Most of the death camps were in Poland, and 11 million people were killed, of which 6 million were Jews. Most of the world had no idea this was going on, and those who did were powerless to stop Hitler and the Nazis. So the final solution is some really, really awful stuff. It's systematic. Like, we look at the steps of genocide. We start with propaganda. We move to laws that strip you of citizenship. You get moved to a ghetto. Ultimately, you get moved to a concentration camp, and then those concentration camps become death camps. That's the order that's had to happen, and that's the order the Nazis took, and it worked. They just about wiped out all the Jews in Europe. This is one of the worst stories to tell in all of history, but it needs to be told so it can be avoided in the future. All right, let's finish our information here on the final solution by revisiting our 2 constructive response questions that fit with today's story. The first question says, generalize the role propaganda played in Hitler's quest to rid Europe of its Jewish population. Well, propaganda made anti-Semitism definitely something that dwelled in the hearts of most of the people in Germany and Austria and in that area. What that means is it forced more and more people to believe that the Jews were bad, and they used children's books to show the Jews as deviants or rapists. They used radio to talk about the Jewish problem. Joseph Goebbels was in charge of propaganda for the Nazis, and we saw the video Master Race. And you saw some of the speeches that they gave, and they just would casually talk about the Jews being bad. You do that enough, and you're going to make people around you believe the same thing that you believe. So certainly radio, books, posters, all sorts of different pieces of propaganda were used to create more anti-Semitism. So by the time you start removing the Jews, people are actually excited and happy that you're doing so, which of course is awful. Our second question says, describe how the Nazis systematically removed 6 million Jews from Europe. Well, of course, you have to start with propaganda again. Propaganda created that anti-Semitism. Then we had the Nuremberg Laws. The Nuremberg Laws stripped the Jews of their citizenship, basically made them second-class citizens, said they couldn't marry anybody else, they couldn't marry German-born people, they couldn't hold office, they couldn't practice medicine, have some of the good jobs. Basically what you're doing is you're creating legal discrimination against Jews. The law is saying it's okay. Certainly we had Kristallnacht, which was kind of the first big event that saw Jews being rounded up and targeted, synagogues being destroyed, businesses being smashed. So that kind of showed you what, the people were willing to do against the Jews. But then the next step is you start moving them to ghettos. You start controlling where they live. You remove them from their homes and you put them in walled off parts of cities called ghettos. That way you can control them. Now they're not necessarily killing them yet, although I'm sure some places that happened. That's the next step. You start moving them into concentration camps. So from the ghettos you go to concentration camps. And they started out as work camps, but eventually several of them, like Auschwitz, turned into death camps where thousands and thousands of Jews were killed every week, primarily through the means of gas chambers. And at that point you're sitting in a system that is allowing, through laws and through the people around you, allowing this kind of thing to happen. And so that's how you would systematically remove 6 million Jews. So that's going to do it for us here today. This is an awful lesson, but it's definitely an important one for us to learn. I hope you learned something. We'll see you next time.